The cream-colored envelope lay on the kitchen counter, elegant with gold calligraphy. It carried an invitation to his brother's wedding, a public declaration of family. But when David saw Mr. David Miller printed alone, a cold fist squeezed his chest. His wife, Sarah, was simply gone, erased. He looked up, and the quiet kitchen felt vast and empty. The Tuesday afternoon had settled into its familiar rhythm. Outside David Miller's home office window, the Michigan wind moved through the bare branches of the oak tree. Inside, the quiet hum of his laptop was the loudest sound. He had just finished a call. The usual end-of-day wrap-up. When the mail slot clattered, expecting bills, maybe a flyer, he walked to the front door, his mind already drifting to what he'd make for dinner. Among the junk mail was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, a fine stock, and addressed in elegant gold calligraphy. Greg's wedding. Finally, he carried it to the kitchen island, a smooth granite slab that seemed to absorb any warmth. David tore it open, the crisp paper rustling. Inside, another card, formal, announcing the marriage of Greg Miller and Emily Davies. He scanned the details, date, time, location. Then he looked at the inner envelope, the one listing the invited guests. Mr. David Miller. The word stood out, stark against the cream. He read it again, and again. His wife, Sarah Miller, his wife of 4 years, was not mentioned. Not a Mr. and Mrs. David Miller, just Mr. David Miller. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too still. A cold knot tightened in David's stomach. He picked up his phone, dialing his mother, Martha Miller. He tried to keep his voice light, almost casual. "Hey, Mom. Got Greg's invitation today. Looks nice. Say, I noticed Sarah's name wasn't on it. Just a printing error, I guess?" Martha's voice, usually brisk, took on a careful, almost hesitant tone. "Oh, David. Yes. Well, you know, these things, they get complicated. It's a small guest list, really intimate, you know. There were just some compromises we had to make." Her words were vague, like smoke curling around the edges of a truth David couldn't quite grasp. The carefulness in her voice did not reassure him. It only made the knot in his stomach pull tighter. "Small, Mom?" David's voice lost some of its manufactured lightness. He gripped the edge of the granite counter. "Sarah's my wife. My wife. She was practically a co-host for Greg's engagement party last year. She prepped half of Christmas dinner, for crying out loud. You told her yourself it was the best stuffing you'd ever had." He could hear his own frustration bleeding into his words, each sentence a small accusation. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a quick exhale. "David, please. It's just, I really have to run. My hair appointment is in 10 minutes. We can talk later. I'm sure it's nothing." And with that, Martha abruptly ended the call. The dial tone hummed, then faded to silence. David stood there, the phone heavy in his hand, the quiet of the house pressing in around him. He stared at the smooth surface of his phone screen, then at the invitation, the elegant script now feeling like a mocking sneer. He tried Greg next. No answer. Voicemail. He sent a text. "Everything okay? Call me about the wedding invite." No reply. He tried again an hour later. And again. The hours stretched, the sun beginning its slow descent outside. The silence in the house grew heavier with each passing minute. The unanswered calls, the unreturned texts. It felt like being shut out, like a door slowly closing. Sarah arrived home a little after 6, the scent of pad thai wafting from the bag in her hand. She walked into the kitchen, a bright smile on her face. "Long day, huh? I figured we deserved takeout." She stopped, her smile faltering. She always read him easily. Too easily sometimes. Her brown eyes, usually warm and quick, scanned his face, then landed on the invitation still sitting on the counter. "What's wrong?" she asked, the lightness gone from her voice. David picked up the invitation. He didn't speak, he just handed it to her. Her fingers brushed his, cool against his skin. Her eyes dropped to the cream-colored card, then to the inner envelope. Her smile vanished entirely. She read it once, then again. Her lips parted slightly, a soft gasp, almost inaudible. The pad thai bag slipped a little in her hand. The sweet and savory smell now seemed out of place, an unwelcome intrusion. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked at him, her brown eyes already beginning to fill. Did they forget? Did they just forget my name? The hurt in her voice was palpable. "A physical thing," David started to explain. "Mom said it was a small guest list. Constraints, compromises." He reached for her hand, trying to offer some comfort, some connection. Her fingers were cold, unresponsive. Sarah pulled her hand away, a quick, almost sharp movement. She stood abruptly, turning away from him. "No, don't. Don't try to fix it." Her voice was tight, strained, the words catching in her throat. "If they don't want me there." She couldn't finish the sentence. She just stood, her shoulders squared, her back to him. Then she turned and hurried out of the kitchen, her footsteps light and quick on the stairs. David stood alone, the cooling pad thai still on the counter, its steam rising faintly. The invitation lay where Sarah had left it. An unsettling piece of paper. It was proof, tangible and cold, that a rift had been carved into something he thought was solid. He found her a few minutes later, lying on their bed, curled on her side. Tears were silently spilling down her face, wetting the pillowcase. She was staring at a framed photograph from last Thanksgiving, a picture of her, Greg, and Martha, all smiling, standing arm in arm. "I thought we were close," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Your mom and I really thought we were." The morning light, usually a gentle wash through the bedroom window, felt harsh and unforgiving. David lay awake long after Sarah had left for work, the empty space beside him cold. The anger that had simmered last night now boiled, a protective heat in his chest. He called his manager, mumbled something about a stomach bug, and hung up. There was no way he could focus on work. Not with this. Not with Sarah's face from last night, crumpled and hurt, burned into his memory. He dressed in jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, the clothes of a man preparing for a confrontation. His brother Greg lived in a newer subdivision, houses all cut from the same cloth, neat and well-maintained. Greg and Nicole Jensen's home was no exception. A perfect lawn, a clean walkway, an expensive SUV parked precisely in the driveway. David pulled up to the curb, the engine still warm, and cut the ignition. He walked to the front door, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. Greg answered, looking surprised, his hair still slightly disheveled, a mug of coffee in his hand. "David, what are you doing here? You didn't call." He shifted awkwardly in the doorway, blocking David's path. David didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pushed past Greg, stepping into the immaculate foyer, the scent of fresh coffee and something floral hanging in the air. "We need to talk about this wedding invitation situation. Right now." His voice was low, controlled, but the edge was unmistakable. Nicole appeared from the kitchen doorway, sleek and composed even in what looked like a silk robe. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. She held a tablet, her expression cool, almost detached. "What's wrong?" Her tone suggested nothing could possibly be wrong. The invitations were sent out as intended. If that's what this is about. David turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "Intended? You deliberately excluded my wife from your wedding." "My wife? Why? What in God's name is going on?" His voice rose, the quiet tension in the room stretching thin. He could feel the pulse thrumming in his temples. Nicole met his gaze without flinching. Her eyes were an icy blue. "After what she said about Greg and me last year." "David, I think you know why." Her words were precise, each one landing with a deliberate weight. David stared, bewildered. "What are you talking about? What did she say?" "At the Christmas party," Nicole continued, her voice devoid of warmth. "She was talking to people about us moving too fast. And how I was, obviously after Greg's money. It wasn't exactly subtle." She paused, letting the accusation hang in the air. Greg heard about it. I heard about it. David felt a cold disbelief wash over him. That's insane. Sarah spent the entire Christmas party with Mom and the kids, playing board games. She barely left the den. That never happened. The memory of Sarah, laughing with his nephews, helping Martha in the kitchen, was vivid. The idea of her gossiping like that, especially about money, was preposterous. She told Brenda. Nicole insisted, her voice hardening. Brenda came straight to me. She heard Sarah say it herself. David let out a short, humorless laugh, a sharp sound in the quiet house. He ran a hand through his hair. Brenda, you're serious? Brenda, who spent 6 months trying to set Greg up with every available woman in the county, who practically orchestrated your first date. You're trusting Brenda with this? She twists everything. Multiple people heard it. David. Nicole cut in, a hint of steel in her voice. But as she said it, David saw a flicker in her eyes, a brief moment of uncertainty, quickly masked. It was enough. David's voice dropped, becoming deadly quiet, each word carefully placed. He looked from Nicole to Greg, who had been standing by silently, his face pale and uncomfortable. Fine. It's your wedding. Your choice. But understand this. If Sarah isn't welcome at that wedding, then I'm not coming either. Greg's face fell, his composure crumbling. David, don't be dramatic. You're my best man. We've talked about this for months. You can't just bail. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out, then dropping. David ignored him. He turned and walked to the front door, his hand already on the doorknob. He paused, looking back at them. You know, at that Christmas party, he said, his voice flat. Brenda was actually the one bad-mouthing you two. Said Nicole was probably a gold digger. Sarah overheard her. And Sarah told Brenda to shut up, that it wasn't her business, and that you two looked genuinely happy. Sarah actually defended you. He watched the impact of his words. Greg looked utterly bewildered, his jaw slack. Nicole's face, so composed moments before, was noticeably paler. The flicker of uncertainty in her eyes returned, a seed of doubt now firmly planted. David opened the door and stepped out, letting the silence of the house fall back behind him. The drive home was a blur. David gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the anger a hot, throbbing pulse behind his eyes. The feeling of betrayal, of being lied to, was a bitter taste in his mouth. He pulled into his driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel, and slammed the car door shut. He found Sarah in the living room, still in her pajamas, curled on the sofa, staring at her phone. The remote control lay forgotten beside her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed, but calmer than last night. Mom just called, she said, her voice flat. Asked if I'd talked you out of making a scene yet. Said you'd probably overreacted. David sat heavily on the armchair opposite her, the cushions sighing under his weight. He recounted the morning, the pristine house, Nicole's icy accusations, Greg's discomfort. He detailed Nicole's claim that Sarah had gossiped about them at the Christmas party, calling Nicole a gold digger, saying they were moving too fast. He explained how Nicole had pointed to Brenda as her source, that Brenda had heard Sarah say it herself. Sarah listened, her hands wrapped around a cold, half-empty coffee mug, her gaze distant. The initial shock gave way to a quiet intensity. She lowered the mug, resting it carefully on the coaster. I remember the conversation with Brenda, she said slowly, her brow furrowed in concentration. Not exactly like that, though. She paused, collecting her thoughts. Brenda was going on and on about how fast Greg and Nicole were moving, how Nicole was probably just after his engineering salary, all that usual Brenda stuff. Sarah looked at David, her eyes clear. I told her to give you guys a chance. I said something like, when you know, and that they seemed happy. I defended them, David. I really did. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, short and hollow. Guess she heard what she wanted to hear. It doesn't matter what she heard, David said, his voice hard. It's what Nicole decided to believe. What she decided to turn into a weapon. He clenched his fists. I told them, if you're not going, I'm not going either. I'm not going to stand there and watch them get married when they've done this to you. Sarah reached out, touching his arm, her touch soft and insistent. No, David. You can't miss your brother's wedding because of me. You're his best man. You've been planning this with him for months. Her voice was gentle, full of the consideration that always defined her. You're not the reason. David cut her off, his voice firm. Their behavior is the reason. Their lies are the reason. I'm not going to enable that kind of deceit. Sarah. Not against you. Not against us. Sarah pulled her hand back, a new light in her eyes. Her earlier hurt, while still present, seemed to be hardening into something else, a resolve David recognized. She stood up abruptly, smoothing the wrinkles from her pajamas. Get dressed, she instructed, her voice calm and steady. Where? David asked, surprised by the sudden shift. To meet Brenda for lunch, Sarah said, her lips set in a thin, determined line. I know just the place. That Italian place downtown. Bella Luna. She loves their ravioli. An hour later, they were seated in a quiet booth at Bella Luna. The aroma of garlic and basil filling the air. Brenda, a woman whose loud personality was often mistaken for confidence, sat across from them, visibly nervous. Her usual animated chatter was subdued. She kept fiddling with the menu, avoiding their gaze. Sarah didn't waste time. She placed her hands flat on the table, her gaze direct. Brenda. Nicole told David that I called her a gold digger at the Christmas party. She said you told her that. Is that what you told Nicole? Brenda's face went pale, her eyes darting between Sarah and David. She swallowed hard, her composure cracking. Well, not exactly like that, she stammered, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. Nicole just came at me, David. She heard something, apparently, and she was really upset. Said she knew Sarah had been talking about her. Brenda took a shaky breath. I was trying to de-escalate. I admit, I was making some comments, some cynical remarks about how quickly they got engaged. And Sarah? You did say something like, when you know. And that they seemed happy. But then, Nicole put words in my mouth. She kept asking if you said certain things, and I just got flustered. I didn't mean to twist it, Sarah, I swear. Nicole was so insistent. She just misinterpreted what I said. You talked about them. Brenda looked genuinely distressed, the weight of her fabrication crumbling under the directness of Sarah's gaze. It wasn't an outright lie, Brenda told Nicole. It was a carefully curated half-truth, a convenient omission that Nicole had, in turn, twisted into a definitive accusation. Brenda dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her face flushed with a mixture of shame and relief. I'm so sorry, Sarah. David. I really am. I just got scared. And Nicole's so intense. I'll fix this, I promise. She pushed back her chair, leaving a half-eaten plate of ravioli, and practically ran out of Bella Luna, a woman driven by a sudden, urgent need for redemption. True to her word, Brenda didn't waste time. By the time David and Sarah were halfway home, the phone lines in the extended family were humming. Brenda called their cousin Linda, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, and then Joe, the quiet but observant family patriarch. She laid out the full, unvarnished truth, confessing her role in Nicole's deception, explaining how her words had been twisted, how Sarah had actually defended Greg and Nicole. The story, now untangled from Nicole's manipulations, began its insidious spread. Whispers started, replacing certainty with confusion, doubt beginning to cloud the previous assumptions about Sarah. Armed with Brenda's irrefutable confession, David called Nicole directly. He wasn't interested in politeness anymore. Nicole, he began, his voice flat. I just had lunch with Brenda. She told us everything, how you twisted her words, how Sarah actually defended you two. He laid out the facts, cold and precise. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then Nicole's voice, colder than before, cut through. Brenda is just covering for Sarah. David. She's your wife's friend. What did you expect her to say? Her tone was dismissive, as if the truth itself was merely a suggestion to be debated. So now you're calling Brenda a liar too? David challenged, a dangerous edge in his voice. First Sarah, now Brenda. Who else in this family is lying, Nicole? Or is it just everyone who contradicts your story? The web of deceit, once a subtle thread, was now escalating, becoming more tangled, more obvious. Nicole didn't waver. I heard what I heard, David. And it wasn't just Brenda. Multiple people. Her voice was unwavering, her resolve absolute. She was determined to maintain her innocent victim stance, to keep Sarah firmly entrenched as the villain, regardless of any evidence presented. David realized it then. Nicole wasn't interested in the truth. She was interested in her narrative. He hung up, the phone feeling heavy and useless. He had one more call to make. He dialed Greg. This time, Greg picked up immediately, his voice tight. David? What now? Greg, David said, keeping his voice steady despite the tremor of anger beneath it. I just spoke with Brenda. She confirmed everything. Nicole twisted her words. Sarah never said any of those things. In fact, she defended you both. Nicole manipulated her into confirming a lie. You need to see what she's doing. He laid out Brenda's detailed confession, hoping the weight of the evidence, the direct testimony, would break through his brother's stubbornness. Greg listened in silence, a long, drawn-out quiet on the line. David could practically see his brother's face, visibly torn, caught between his loyalty to Nicole and the shocking accusations against her. Finally, Greg let out a sigh. A weary sound. Look, David, he began, his voice softer, pleading. I know this is all messy. But Nicole's upset. Can't you just apologize? For the sake of the wedding? For Mom? Please, let's just make peace. He was asking David to sacrifice Sarah's honor, to bend to the lie for the sake of convenience, for the illusion of peace. Apologize for what, Greg? David asked, his voice hardening. For telling the truth? For standing up for my wife? I cannot compromise on Sarah's honor. I won't allow her to be disrespected, not like this. He hung up, the finality of the action settling in the silence that followed. Minutes later, his phone rang again. It was Martha. Her voice was distressed, her usual careful tone replaced by a desperate edge. David, what is going on? Brenda just called me. Linda called me. Everyone's calling me. What is this drama? You need to make peace for Greg's sake. This is his wedding. David explained it all, patiently, slowly. He walked her through Nicole's manipulation, Brenda's confession, the clear, undeniable lie. He felt the words of the truth hanging in the air, hoping they would cut through the noise. But Martha seemed overwhelmed, the complexity of the situation too much for her. I just don't know who to believe, she said, her voice thin and tired. It's all so confusing. Why can't everyone just get along? She sounded less like a mother seeking justice and more like someone eager to sweep the mess under the rug. The phone clicked off. David looked at Sarah, who had been sitting quietly beside him, listening to the one-sided conversations. The family, once a solid, if sometimes dysfunctional, unit, was now visibly divided. Some, likely Martha and Greg, still clung to Nicole's narrative, perhaps out of convenience or a desperate desire for an easy peace. Others, particularly the cousins like Linda and Joe, hearing Brenda's full confession, were beginning to rally, their quiet support gathering around David and Sarah like a protective shield. The wedding, once a symbol of unity, had become a battleground. The wedding day dawned, a crisp autumn morning. In David and Sarah's home, it was quiet, almost somber. No frantic preparations, no last-minute adjustments to a tuxedo or a dress, just the soft clinking of coffee cups and the muted sound of the news on the television. They had held firm in their stance. If Sarah wasn't welcome, neither was David. Then the calls started. Martha first, her voice strained, bordering on tears. David, please. Greg is heartbroken. This is his wedding day. How can you do this to him? Please. Just come. Her plea was raw, not manipulative, but filled with the emotional burden of a mother watching her family fracture. Minutes later, Greg's name flashed on the caller ID. David, he pleaded, his voice tight with desperation. "You're my best man. You have to be here. I don't care about anything else. Just be here. Please." The vulnerability in his brother's voice was a punch to David's gut. Sarah watched him from across the kitchen table, her gaze soft, understanding. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the pain that warred with his resolve. She knew how deep his love for his brother ran, how much this day meant to Greg, despite everything. "Go," Sarah said gently, her voice barely a whisper but firm. She had made her decision. "Go for your mom. For Greg, we'll stand together, no matter what happens." Her words were not a surrender, but a quiet strength, an affirmation of their bond that transcended the current conflict. David nodded, the relief and gratitude mixing with the apprehension in his chest. An hour later, dressed in his finest suit, Sarah in a simple, elegant navy dress, they pulled into the crowded church parking lot. Their unexpected presence created an immediate, palpable tension. Heads turned as they walked down the aisle, the hushed whispers rippling through the congregation like a disturbance in still water. From the altar, Nicole spotted them, her face, moments before radiant, contorted in a mixture of shock and unconcealed fury. Her eyes, usually so cold, now burned with a raw, unprotected anger. She hadn't expected them. She hadn't prepared for this. Greg, standing beside her, looked up, his eyes meeting David's. A wave of relief washed over his face, quickly followed by a flash of confusion. David offered a small, solemn nod. "We're here for you, Greg," he murmured as he passed. "And for Mom." The ceremony proceeded, a beautiful, solemn affair. But the undercurrent of tension remained. A silent hum beneath the organ music and the recited vows. The reception was held in a grand ballroom, decorated with white flowers and twinkling lights. During dinner, a man David vaguely recognized from Greg's work delivered a generic best man speech. It was polite, lacking any warmth or personal touch, clearly a hastily arranged stand-in. David watched, his jaw tight, a hollow feeling in his gut. As the stand-in finished his speech, politely clearing his throat and stepping away from the microphone, Brenda suddenly stood up from her table. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversations, all faded as every eye in the room turned to her. Her face was pale, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and resonant. "I have something to say," Brenda announced, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, finally settling on Nicole. Her eyes held a mixture of apology and fierce determination. "Nicole, what you told everyone about Sarah, about what she supposedly said at Christmas." Brenda took a deep breath, her voice unwavering. "It was a lie." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Nicole's face went white. "Sarah," Brenda continued, her voice gaining strength. "Sarah actually defended you, Nicole. She told me to give you and Greg a chance. She said you looked happy." Brenda's words echoed through the stunned silence. Then, from another table, cousins Linda and Joe rose, standing beside Brenda. Linda's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the silence. "Brenda told us the truth," she confirmed. Nicole twisted everything. It was a calculated lie to exclude Sarah. Joe, usually so quiet, simply nodded, his eyes conveying a grave affirmation. A stunned silence fell over the entire room, quickly dissolving into murmurs and gasps as the truth, unveiled in such a public, devastating manner, reverberated through the assembled guests. All eyes turned to Nicole, whose face was a mask of mortification. The carefully constructed facade of the innocent victim, the wronged bride, shattered into 1,000 pieces. Nicole let out a choked cry, a sound of pure humiliation and rage. She snatched her pristine white bouquet from the table, a flurry of roses and baby's breath, and hurled it with surprising force across the room. It struck a large floral arrangement with a soft thud. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the reception hall, the doors swinging wildly in her wake. The silence that followed her exit was heavier, more profound than before. This was a day of costly choices, and it seemed the bill was finally due. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Chaos erupted. The opulent reception hall, moments before filled with celebratory chatter, was now a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and stunned silence. Nicole's abrupt exit, the flung bouquet, left a bewildered and utterly humiliated Greg standing alone at the head table. The pristine white tablecloth, meant for celebration, now seemed to mock him. Greg stared after Nicole for a frozen moment, then pushed back his chair, scraping loudly across the polished floor. He stumbled after her, weaving through the tables, his face a mixture of shock and desperate confusion. David watched him go, knowing it was futile. Nicole's deceit was irrevocably exposed, stripped bare for all to see. She would not return. The wedding, once a symbol of hope and new beginnings, lay in shambles. Guests, unsure how to react, began to depart, their confusion palpable. Martha, her face pale and drawn, moved through the room like a ghost, attempting to salvage what little dignity remained, offering weak apologies for the abrupt end to the festivities. It was a heartbreaking scene. A meticulously planned event, dissolving into chaos. In the immediate aftermath, Greg's humiliation curdled into a furious rage, directed squarely at David. He lashed out, his voice hoarse with blame. "You did this. You ruined everything. You deliberately sabotaged my wedding." He refused to hear any explanation, any truth. He retreated to Martha's house, shutting out David, initially convinced of his brother's malicious betrayal. The deep-seated hurt, the public embarrassment, had twisted his perception. Over the next few weeks, the quiet Midwestern town buzzed with the story. Martha, heartbroken by the unraveling of her son's wedding, but resolute in her desire for family peace, began to mediate. Slowly, gently, she helped Greg confront the stark reality of Nicole's actions. She recounted Brenda's confession, corroborated by Linda and Joe, her own growing realization that David and Sarah had been telling the truth all along. Greg, wounded and raw, eventually confronted Nicole again. She, true to form, attempted to deflect and deny, weaving new layers of excuses, painting herself as the true victim. But this time, Greg saw through her. The carefully constructed facade, once so convincing, now looked flimsy and transparent. The truth, once denied, was now undeniable. Unable to face the fallout, the whispered judgments, and the inescapable truth, Nicole took a new job, far away. In Colorado, it was a quiet, almost clinical end to their relationship, a retreat from the consequences of her own making. Eventually, the initial fury in Greg faded, replaced by a profound sense of regret and shame. One quiet evening, weeks after the disastrous wedding, his phone rang. It was Greg. "David," he began, his voice soft, hesitant. I was wrong, about everything. I'm so sorry. For not believing you. For not believing Sarah." The words were difficult, each one forced out, but they were genuine. David and Greg met for coffee a few days later. It was a long, heartfelt, and difficult conversation. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes, but as they talked, slowly, carefully, the first fragile threads of understanding began to weave through the raw wounds. It was the arduous process of mending a fractured brotherhood. A journey that would take time, but one that had finally begun. Martha expressed her profound relief and gratitude to David and Sarah. "You both showed such integrity," she told them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Such courage. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." The family dynamics had shifted. David and Sarah, once ostracized, were now seen as heroes who had exposed a deeply embedded deception. Their bond, having endured betrayal and public scrutiny, was stronger and more resilient than ever. The painful experience, while scarring, had taught them the true meaning of loyalty, honesty, and integrity within a family. Life in their Midwestern town slowly returned to a new normal, marked by a newfound honesty and a deeper, more profound understanding of familial love. The air in our Midwestern home remained quiet, but the lingering echoes of conflict were still present. The wedding that never quite was, the public unraveling of a carefully constructed illusion, had left its mark. Nicole had moved on, chasing a new life far from the judgment of our family. Greg, humbled and bruised by the experience, had slowly begun the work of rebuilding, not just his relationship with David, but with himself. Martha, too, had come to see the truth, her initial bewilderment giving way to a quiet appreciation for the integrity her sons and their wives displayed. Life, as it always does, went on. The fall harvest gave way to winter snows, then spring thaws. Our small town, accustomed to its rhythms, absorbed the drama and slowly returned to its gentle hum. But beneath the surface, something had changed. The bonds within our family, once taken for granted, had been tested and reforged in the fires of betrayal and truth. David and Sarah stood closer than ever. Their trust in each other deepened by the ordeal. They understood, in a way they never had before, the true cost of deceit and the immeasurable value of loyalty.